Welcome back for another deep dive. You sent some research over on how humans make decisions and some of the quirks in that process. And wow, it is fascinating stuff. We're going to be looking at how our brains, even when we think we are being completely logical, can take these kind of surprising shortcuts.
Yeah, these shortcuts are called cognitive biases and heuristics. And you can think of them like mental rules of thumb. A lot of times they're super helpful, for making quick decisions when things are complex, but sometimes they can lead us to make choices that are flawed.
And we're not just talking about like everyday mistakes here. This affects like big stuff. Financial decisions, the way we assess risk. It's actually kind of humbling when you realize how much is going on under the surface.
Oh, yeah, definitely. So take, for example, the Linda problem. Imagine you see someone reading The Economist. Now, do you think they're more likely to be a truck driver or a truck driver with a PhD in economics?
Hmm. I think I'd probably say the truck driver with a PhD.
Yeah.
Just because someone reading The Economist seems like it'd be pretty highly educated.
Right, and that's a really natural assumption to make, but statistically there are way more truck drivers than truck drivers with PhDs in economics. So it's a classic example of what we call the conjunction fallacy. Our brains just kind of latch on to specific details and overlook the basic probabilities.
Okay, so even though it seems more likely that a person reading The Economist would have a PhD, the actual broader category of truck driver is more probable.
That's so interesting. Yeah, and it's not just hypothetical either. This happens in real life all the time. Let's say you're flipping a coin and you get heads 5 times in a row. Does it feel like tails is due?
Yeah, yeah, it feels like at some point it has to even out.
Well, that's what we call the gambler's fallacy. Each coin flip is what's called an independent event. So basically what that means is that the previous outcomes have no impact on the next one. It's really tempting to want to see these patterns, but in reality, the odds are totally reset with every new flip.
So even if I get 10 heads in a row, the chances of getting another heads are still 50-50.
Exactly. Think about it like a roulette wheel. Just because the ball lands on red a few times in a row, that doesn't mean black is any more likely on the next spin.
Wow, this is making me rethink every time I felt like I was due for a win at the casino.
Yeah, it's just how our brains are. We're always trying to find patterns even when they don't actually exist. This also comes into play with what we call the representativeness bias. Imagine flipping a coin 10 times. Which sequence feels more random to you? Heads, tails, or all heads?
Hmm. I'd probably say the heads, tails feels more random. All heads just seems too perfect.
And that's exactly how the representativeness bias works. We tend to judge randomness based on how well it matches what we think random should look like, but in reality, a perfectly alternating pattern is actually less likely to happen randomly.
This is blowing my mind. I'm really starting to see how much our intuition can be misleading.
And we've only just started. Another one of these heuristics is called the availability bias. And it basically shows how easily remembered events, like things that are really sensationalized, can actually distort our perception of how probable something is.
Oh, like how some people are more afraid of shark attacks than vending machine accidents, even though vending machine accidents are statistically more common.
Exactly. Shark attacks are everywhere in the media. They're scary and vivid, which makes them super easy to recall. So then that impacts how we perceive the risk. Whereas vending machine accidents, while they happen more often, they don't make the news, so we underestimate how likely they are.
Wow, it's like our brains are putting together this highlight reel of all the most dramatic events, and we start to think that's reality.
That's a great way to put it. And speaking of how easily our perceptions can be swayed, let's talk about anchoring bias. Have you ever noticed how a random number can affect your judgment?
I think I know what you mean. You sent over that research about the experiment where they had people spin a wheel with numbers on it and then estimate the population of logos.
Yes. And even though that wheel spin was completely irrelevant, the people who spun a higher number always guessed a higher population for logos.
So even though they knew that number was random, it still kind of anchored their thinking.
Exactly. It's called anchoring bias.
Hmm.
We tend to grab onto that initial piece of information, even if it's totally random, and use it as a reference for future judgments. And this can have a huge impact on things like salary negotiations or setting a price for something.
It's kind of scary to think about how our decisions are being influenced without us even realizing it. I remember you sent over one more example about anchoring something with multiplying numbers.
Oh, yeah, that one's really interesting. They had two groups of people estimate the product of a bunch of numbers. One group saw them in descending order, so 8 by 7 by 6 and down to 1, and the other group saw them in ascending order, starting with 1 and up to 8.
So the same numbers, just in a different order. What happened?
Well, the group that saw the descending order always gave much higher estimates, even though the math was exactly the same. The first number they saw basically anchored their expectation for the final result.
Wow, that's incredible. Our brains are amazing, but also incredibly susceptible to these subtle things.
And we haven't even touched on the whole world of gains and losses. Next up, we're going to dig into prospect theory and how our brains handle winning versus losing.
All right, so you mentioned gains and losses. This is where things start to get really interesting, right? And we were talking about how our brains react to winning and losing.
Yeah, exactly. Prospect theory is all about this. Imagine you're walking down the street and you find a $100 bill on the ground. Now imagine you lose a $100 bill. Which one feels stronger?
Oh, I think losing the $100 would feel way worse, even though it's the same amount of money.
Exactly. That's what prospect theory is all about. Losses feel bigger than gains to our brains. And it's not even just about the money itself, it's about the psychological impact. We just feel the pain of a loss way more strongly than we feel the pleasure of an equivalent gain.
This is making me think about those times when I've stressed out over a small investment loss, even when my whole portfolio is doing well overall. It's like those losses just stick with you more.
Oh, yeah, they definitely do. It's like our brains have this magnifying glass for losses. And prospect theory represents this with what they call a kinked value function. Basically, the curve is steeper for losses than for gains, and that's why we have this lopsided emotional response.
So how does this actually play out in our everyday life? Can you give me an example?
Sure, let's say you're trying to negotiate a salary and you want a $10,000 raise. If the employer frames it as you avoiding a $10,000 pay cut, you're statistically more likely to accept a smaller raise.
Because it feels like I'm losing something if I don't take it, even though it's a gain.
Yeah, exactly. Loss aversion can be a really powerful motivator. And similarly, think about investing. Prospect theory basically says that we're just naturally more risk averse when we're faced with a possible loss, even if a potential gain might be just as attractive.
So it's not just about logic and numbers. Emotions play a huge role, too.
Absolutely. And if we can recognize this tendency toward loss aversion, it can really help us make more rational decisions, whether it's about negotiating that salary, making investments, or even just deciding whether or not to get that extended warranty.
This is all making a lot of sense. And does this tie into the endowment effect at all? Like the idea that we overvalue things simply because we own them.
You're exactly right. Remember that experiment with the mugs and the chocolate? They basically gave people either a mug or a chocolate bar randomly, and then they gave them the option to trade.
And almost nobody wanted to trade, even though they didn't have a preference initially. It was like
Yeah.
owning it suddenly made it more valuable.
Yeah, that's the endowment effect for you. It creates this feeling of attachment and loss aversion just because you own something. Giving up that mug, even for something equally good, suddenly feels like a loss.
It's like our brains are telling us, hold on to what you've got. I mean, it's kind of funny when you think about it,
Yeah.
but it also makes sense.
It definitely shows how interesting human behavior can be. And this endowment effect isn't just about mugs and chocolate either. It impacts how we value everything we own, how we make purchasing decisions, even how we negotiate in business.
Wow, this deep dive has been so eye-opening. I mean, all these hidden forces that shape our choices. It's incredible. But so now that we know all this, what can we actually do about it? Can we outsmart these biases?
Well, that's the big question, isn't it? We can't completely eliminate them, but becoming aware of them is the first step to making more deliberate choices. And it's important to remember these heuristics have helped us survive as humans. They let us navigate this crazy, complex world.
So they're not all bad.
No, not at all. They let us make quick decisions and simplify things when there's too much information. The tricky part is knowing when we should trust our gut and when we should slow down and be more analytical.
So for big decisions, we really need to step back and ask ourselves, is this just my intuition talking? Or is there a bias at play here?
Exactly. And that leads us into some practical applications for all of this. Let's talk about how understanding these biases can help us make better choices in the real world.
All right, let's talk about putting this into practice. How can we actually use this knowledge about biases to make better decisions in real life? I'm ready to try this stuff out.
Okay, well, let's start with something like negotiations. Imagine you're buying a used car. Well, if you know about anchoring bias, that can be a huge advantage. If the seller starts out by naming a really high price, don't let that be your starting point.
So I shouldn't get stuck on that first number, even if it seems okay at the time.
Exactly. Do your research ahead of time, figure out what a fair price would be, and then you can go in with your own offer. And this is where that loss aversion thing can come in handy. Instead of focusing on what the seller would gain from accepting your offer, try framing it as what they would lose by not taking it.
Ooh, that's smart. Like saying, if you don't take this offer, you might not sell the car today. And who knows when you'll find another buyer.
Exactly. It kind of subtly makes them think about a potential loss, and that can make your offer more appealing. Hmm. Okay, now let's think about investing. Prospect theory basically tells us that we're really cautious when it comes to potential losses, and that can lead us to make some not so great choices.
So you mean like selling off investments when the market is down, even if it would be better to hold on to them long term?
Exactly. We panic and start making decisions based on emotions and these short term changes. But really, we should be thinking about our long term goals. So, if we can recognize that natural tendency toward loss aversion, it can help us stay on track even when the market dips, and ultimately come out ahead in the end.
Yeah, it's like you got to take a deep breath and remember that the market goes up and down. That's normal. You don't want to abandon your whole plan just because of a few dips.
All right, now let's think about how these biases show up in marketing. Advertisers are pros at using like really vivid imagery and catchy slogans so that people will remember their product.
Oh, yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely. Those jingles can get stuck in your head forever.
Well, they're using that availability bias. They're making sure that their brand is the first thing you think of when you're ready to buy something. The more we see those ads, the more available that product is in our memory, and then we're more likely to pick it.
It's kind of like they're planting a seed in our brains without us even realizing it.
Exactly. But if we understand how these biases work, then we can be smarter consumers and not be as easily swayed by those tactics. So, yeah, I think this deep dive has been really interesting. It's amazing to see all these hidden forces that affect our choices every day.
I totally agree. I mean, I don't think I'm going to look at a coin flip, a negotiation, or a commercial the same way ever again. But honestly, knowing all of this is actually kind of empowering too.
It really is. And just remember, these biases are a part of what makes us human.
Yeah.
They've helped us survive and figure things out in a really complex world for a long time. I think the key is to recognize when they're affecting our thinking, and then we can make more conscious choices.
So it's not about being perfectly rational 100% of the time.
Mm.
It's more about knowing when we should trust our gut and when we should maybe take a step back and look at things more objectively.
Yeah, that's a great way to put it. This has been a really fascinating look into how our minds work.
And for everyone listening, remember, this is just the beginning. There's so much more to learn about this stuff. It's a whole universe of research out there just waiting to be explored. So if you're curious and want to learn more, keep digging into this fascinating world of behavioral economics. You never know, you might be surprised by what you find out about yourself and how your own mind works. Thanks for joining us.